How's it going, everybody? I'm so glad you're here, and today we're going to be talking about Weapons, written and directed by Zach Cregger and starring Julia Garner, Josh Brolin, and Alden Ehrenreich. Last night at 2:17 a.m., every child from Mrs. Gandy's class woke up, got out of bed, went downstairs, opened the front door, walked into the dark, and they never came back. That is the tagline of the movie. That is all you need to know about the movie. That's all I'm going to say about the movie because I want you to be going into this as blind as possible. I'll still be including a little bit of trailer footage in this, as I always do, to just help with the pacing of the video, but I'll be very strategic about what I show you, just so as I don't give even the slightest bit about the plot away from anything visual. Because if you're anything like me, if you see something cool in the trailer, you're going to start to wonder when that will appear in the film, and that can sort of unintentionally spoil things for you. So I'm going to be very careful about what I put in this video. Also, not to mention that that tagline that I just read off was really the only piece of information we had about the film, except for some grainy surveillance footage of these kids running away in a Naruto T-pose sort of situation for a really long time, and it generated a great deal of hype surrounding this movie, not to mention the fact that it's directed by Zach Cregger, who did Barbarian a few years ago. He's one of the more recent voices in the comedian to horror filmmaking pipeline, and I thought, like many people thought, Barbarian was wonderful. I really enjoyed that film. It does have its critics, and a lot of the complaints that those people have with it, I totally vibe with and I totally understand. A lot of the comedy in that film isn't interwoven to the horror as much as it is completely separated from it, so that film can kind of feel like it has a bit of a tonal imbalance. However, I would argue the exact opposite for Weapons. I thought that this film has one of the most amazing balances of tone management in terms of horror and comedy of the past few years. I thought that this film was spectacular. The film does follow a non-linear structure and has already gotten many a comparison to Pulp Fiction or Magnolia because of this, but really aside from the ensemble cast of this movie, I wouldn't really compare it to either of those films at all. Zach Cregger's directing style is slightly reminiscent of Paul Thomas Anderson's, but in terms of story or where the film goes or its themes, I don't see many other similarities to Magnolia aside from ensemble cast and non-linear storytelling. Same with Pulp Fiction. I mean, you're just going to kind of naturally get those comparisons, but I don't think that they're that profound. And I've seen some complaints already about the non-linear structure in which people will argue that it doesn't exist for much of a purpose beyond withholding information until the most convenient time for the film. And my only response to that would be, is that not the point of doing a non-linear structure? Because also one of the most foolproof tests you can do as to whether or not a non-linear structure is working is take the film that you've just seen after it's over and imagine it being played out chronologically in your head. And if that version of the film would suck, then you've got something pretty special. And in terms of Weapons, this film would not nearly be as effective as it is if it were told linearly. And I don't think it's just because of information revealing. I think that there's a lot more thematically at play here with the nonlinear structure that I'm excited to talk about, and that I think people are missing, quite frankly. It was certainly my own fault for creating my own expectations of what a film like this was going to do based on the very, very little marketing it had. The marketing leaned heavily into the creepypasta horror elements of the surveillance footage and the central mystery without giving much of anything about the film away. And Barbarian did something similar, and it ruffled feathers in a similar way that some people are feeling with this film, in the sense that it didn't reveal the comedy in any of the marketing. So when people saw it, it took them by surprise, it was against what they were expecting and against what they were wanting, so they didn't wind up caring for it. And with this film, I definitely understand that, because I expected this film to be funny. I did not expect to at some points not be able to hear the dialogue because I was cackling so hard for so long at certain jokes. And admittedly, there was a part of me that was sort of pseudo-grieving for the first 20 minutes of this film, because it's pretty clear within 2 minutes that it was going to be the furthest thing away from my expectations of what I thought it was going to be going in. So it took me a while to kind of settle into everything on my first viewing. I've seen the film twice now, so I better understood what it was trying to do. But early on, it did take me a minute to settle into. And again, after a half an hour, it was very clear to me that I legitimately had no idea at any given point where the film was going to go next. After a half an hour, I had to completely sit back with my jaw hung open. I think my jaw was open more than it wasn't throughout the entirety of this film, which is high praise, especially for a horror film, because those films are often the most predictable, and this was one of the most unpredictable ones I've seen in recent memory. I just mentioned about how I didn't expect the film to be as funny as it was, despite it being a Zach Cregger film, and expecting a little bit of comedy in there. And that's not to say that the film isn't unsettling. It is very, very scary, and there are a couple of moments in particular that will make my stomach drop at merely the thought of them for a really long time. But what I was most impressed with about the integration of the comedy into the horror aspects of this film is that the comedy is never at the expense of the messages that this film is trying to convey, or the very serious discussions that it wants the audience to have. It's always at the expense of either individual conversations between characters, or at just the pure absurdity of the situations of the plot at hand, because the third act of this movie, and a lot of things before it, are fucking nuts. But like I said, it never compromises on its ability or its want to get across to the audience the importance of having some really, really tough discussions, really timely ones, and ones that we're not having a ton in the cinematic landscape at the moment. And while I agree with some people that there are definitely elements to the lore of what winds up explaining what happened to these kids and why it happened, that I wish were developed more, because I think it would give some of these messages a bit more of a hard stamp and understanding. I'm finding a shocking amount of people that are claiming this film to be hollow or not about anything or lacking any sort of thematic depth, because I couldn't have had a more opposing experience. I also agree to an extent that the ending does feel a little bit abrupt, but again, it's all in service of something far greater, and whether or not those things and how they're presented to you work for you is entirely up to your own taste, and that's completely fine. But the fact that some people are completely dismissing them, I find to be a little bit contradictory. And what I think people are missing is that because this film is really funny, people miss that the film is also still about grief and tragedy and Zach Cregger's own personal experiences with confronting his own. A lot of people are claiming that this film isn't about grief and horror because it's funny, and there's just this inherent desire for horror movies to not be made about these things anymore. But I welcomed this film's messaging with open arms because of how uniquely it presented them to me. It felt wholly original. It felt completely different from the 95 other horror films about these topics we've gotten in recent years. And I also think it helps with the nonlinear storytelling. Grief is one of the most nonlinear emotions that we as humans experience, and presenting this film in that way with grief at its center, I think is a really profound idea. And it also adds a lot to the comedy, as you'll see when you see the film. So I thought the overall presentation was just fairly genius, if I'm being completely honest. Not to mention that the direction is absolutely superb. Zach Cregger's influences are obviously undeniable, but the confidence in which he moves his camera and the way he manipulates the framing and when the shots move and how long they last feels surgically precise and very unique, especially for the genre. There are a couple jump scares in this film, which I normally would hate, but are honestly probably all-timers for me. The camera is almost always moving, but he never plays the same trick twice, which is one of the most impressive things about this film. I saw an interview with him where he said that every single day he has every shot he wants to get that day poster boarded and storyboarded on the wall so the whole crew can see it, so that everyone understands what the shot is and what the movie ultimately is going to be. And that shows with flying colors in this film. The editing is so sharp, especially in the first half an hour. Everything feels rhythmically timed as if it's an orchestral piece. I thought it was brilliant. Also, just a disclaimer, I saw Megan Cruz on TikTok make this same point, but I would like to reiterate it as someone who probably doesn't have the same demographic as her. I've seen some people, including people in my family, who normally would be excited to see a film like this, but are avoiding it because of the inherent implication that there will be violence committed against children. And to echo Megan's statement on TikTok, I think you're safe. I believe Megan's a mother of a child, a young boy around the same age, and she even said, as a mother of a young boy that age, I think you're safe. This film is brutal, and it is violent, and it is bloody, and it is gory, but the areas in which that violence is directed is very unexpected. And it doesn't involve the children as much as, it doesn't involve the children in the way that you would think. I'll leave it at that. The fact that this film got an IMAX release is absolutely extraordinary. Numbers are tracking for this to have a better opening weekend than anticipated, and that would be absolutely a wonderful step in the right direction. And I don't want to hear a single soul complaining about how movies aren't as good as they used to be if they don't go out and see this film. Between this and 28 Years Later and Sinners and Bring Her Back, and we still have 4.5 months left in the year, 2025 is easily the best horror film year since 1999, and it's frankly not even close. I'm going to be giving Weapons a 9 out of 10. I thought this film was absolutely extraordinary. Zach Cregger is 2 for 2. I'm so excited to see what he does next. I will watch anything he does. Everyone in the film was extraordinary and brought their A game. Please see this film and support it this weekend and beyond. It's well worth your time. Thank you guys so much as always for watching this video. Leave a comment down below what you thought of the film. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.